The Chosen has always started slow, but once it gets going, boy, does it not let up until the eventual banger of a conclusion. I'm not sure how this season will top the prior's final, with the feeding of the 5,000 and walking on water, but Season 4 is as good as it's ever been, so it has my full confidence. In Episode 6 of The Chosen Season 4, Jesus gives the Good Shepherd sermons, John 10, which contain some of the most quoted verses in Scripture. If you're studying The Chosen with your small group, youth ministry, or Bible study, there's a lot for you to explore. The discussion guide and questions below are designed to help you and your community dig into the original biblical source material and the depiction of this biblical text in The Chosen Season 4. The 6th episode opens with a flash forward. With Big James badly hurt, the disciples, drenched and disheveled, stormed into a quiet inn dining room. Simon silences them as they wonder what all of the recent happenings imply. They see someone coming and worry that it might be a pursuer. The episode then fast-forwards a few days to the start of Hanukkah, the Jewish holiday dedicated to rededication. The disciples start acting out the events of the celebration after lighting the first candle and saying a prayer. These events include the ascent of Alexander the Great, also known as Alexander the Worst by the Jewish disciples, his unexpected death, the division of his empire into 4 kingdoms under the leadership of his generals, and King Antiochus Epiphanes' Sabbath day attack on Jerusalem, which ended with the desecration of the temple with pig's blood and the abomination of desolation. Following this initial round of acts, a few of the disciples trade gifts. Matthew and John, for example, give writing equipment to one another. Thomas is constantly shown to us in this scene, and the ones that follow, haunted by the memory of Rama. The next evening, the festival resumes, with the disciples acting out the following events: the persecution of the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes, the uprising spearheaded by Judah Maccabee, the Greek expulsion from the temple along with the idol of Zeus, and the rededication of the altar, wherein the lamp miraculously continued to burn for 8 days despite only having a day's supply of oil. The disciples thank God with musical renditions of Psalm 116, Psalm 113, and Psalm 118 on the 3rd night of the festival. Following an arm-wrestling bout in which Andrew triumphs over John, Jesus tells the company that he will be traveling to Jerusalem on the last day of the celebration to give a teaching session in the temple. Thomas thinks that Jesus is ready, pointing out that the last time he taught in public, shortly before Rama died, was not great. When the other disciples are enjoying their gifts the following morning, John wonders what he may offer Thomas, and they finally settle on getting him new sandals. Matthew takes a look at the bag to make sure there is enough cash. Startled by how little he discovers, he chooses to ask Judas whether there is another pocketbook. Judas is not amused by Matthew's plea. He maintains that they will have to barter their way up because they don't have enough money. Even after the recent expenses, Matthew is perplexed because he has mentally calculated everything and is certain they should have enough money. Judas bemoans the group's slow and ineffective progress while maintaining that Matthew is mistaken. They have more to do for the country. Matthew proceeds to inform the others that they would have to barter because he doesn't want to cause any trouble. At the market, Peter diverts Thomas by asking for his assistance in choosing soap, while Andrew, James, and John try to barter up to a new pair of sandals. When he inquires about Thomas' emotional state, Thomas replies that although he ought to feel appreciative, he truly feels awful. When he is working on a task, that is the only moment he doesn't feel terrible. Following Peter's disclosure of Eden's miscarriage, Thomas discovers that he previously knew about it from Rama and connected it to Peter's meeting with Jesus on the lake. Thomas wonders why Jesus has aided others but not Rama, just as Peter once did. As long as Thomas is prepared to accept the responses that God gives, Peter affirms Thomas's right to ask questions about God. But arguments based on free will or the idea that God's ways are superior to our own are unconvincing to Thomas. The disciples sing a rendition of Psalm 115 on the 4th night as they give thanks to God. While Thomas accepts his new sandals, Matthew casts a dubious glance toward Judas. From Bethany, on the other side of the Jordan, comes a message. While explaining that Lazarus is ill, Jesus reassures them that this illness does not cause death. Feeling miserable, he heads out for the night. The Song of Miriam, Exodus 15, is encouraged to be sung by the women in the interim. Another night goes by. The disciples are winnowing and threshing wheat the following day. Disturbed by this menial work, Judas suggests that they choose donation collectors in the communities they visit, who would then gather money each time they pass by. None of the other disciples appear really thrilled about Judas' suggestion. Instead, they all appear pleased to thresh wheat. Angered, Judas heads to his own meal, but John spots him and approaches to have a conversation. John questions whether Judas, like he and James did, is conflating his personal desire with the growth of the kingdom. John tells Judas to talk to Jesus about it after he argues that he's just being creative and attempting to ease the tension brought on by ambiguity. When Judas encounters Jesus in a field watching a sheepfold, he adamantly states that all he wants is for Jesus' kingdom to come and for all barriers to be lifted out of the way. Following his explanation of his donation plan, Jesus tells Judas that he has a vision that exceeds his wildest expectations and begs him to closely monitor the emotions his impending speech arouses in him. Judas walks away irritated. After dining for 7 nights, the disciples pray Psalm 118. The disciples are anxious about their impending trip to Jerusalem. They eventually reach the temple in Jerusalem after crossing the Jordan the following day, Judas paying the ferryman. Some religious authorities observe as Jesus starts to deliver his well-known Good Shepherd lectures as he passes by some sheep that are being kept for slaughter. Though they don't recognize him right away, they quickly become upset by the suggestion that he is bringing Gentiles into God's fold. Judas is unable to concentrate because of the mockery directed at Jesus. On the other hand, the religious authorities are starting to see that Jesus is presenting himself as God's special son. When Jesus ultimately decides it's time to go, the religious authorities intervene and demand to know if he truly believes he is the Messiah. Jesus goes one step farther and says that he and the Father are one, insisting that his action bears witness to his identity. The religious authorities are pushed over the edge by this, and they start throwing stones at the disciples for what they perceive to be blasphemy. Judas watches, angry that Jesus doesn't defend himself, as the disciples are forced to run when John is struck. They leave Jerusalem as darkness falls and cross the river without waiting for a ferryman. We resume from the beginning of the episode as they head back to the inn. Simon was nervously observing via the window as James lay hurt on the table, and the disciples were soaked and afraid. Zebedee, who is stunned by his son's injury, is their guest. While reading a letter, Jesus delivers it to Mary Magdalene, who informs the group that Lazarus has passed away. The disciples are shocked by this news because they remember Jesus saying the illness wouldn't result in death. When Jesus says Lazarus is just sleeping and needs to be woken, they become even more perplexed. It doesn't help much when Jesus tells them that Lazarus died so that they could believe, especially Judas, who doesn't get it. Even though it means dying with Lazarus, Thomas, who is a little bit fey, is cool with the thought of traveling to Judea to be with him. Since Mary has been paying attention to what Jesus has been saying, she is the only one who can sense his anguish and pain. Zebedee tells the terrible news about the conspiracy to have Jesus crucified, which exacerbates the situation. The narrative of the disciples is interrupted at some point in the episode to focus on Yosef's writing. Yosef begs his father not to give up on him in the event that things with the Sanhedrin go wrong when his father finds him. Even when he was annoyed that Yosef didn't choose the easy route and instead served in a remote area, his father reassures Yosef that he has never doubted him. Soon after Jairus receives Yosef's letter, he locates Zebedee and learns about the scheme to have Jesus crucified in order to further their own goals. Zebedee offers to go warn the disciples himself because Jairus feels it would be too dangerous to send word to them personally because of the order. Under false pretenses, he encloses a letter of approval from Jairus with a supply of oil for the Jerusalem temple. When he gets there, he's concerned about the attempted stoning, but also a little happy to learn that it was an unplanned incident. He informs the disciples that a severe deterioration is imminent,